Elspeth stood in front of the fire, stirring the morning's porridge with slow, sleepy circles. She yawned, tired from the events of the night before. The fire's warmth didn't help rouse her. With half-closed lids, she heard her grandmother into the kitchen behind her.
"Elspeth! Child! Someone's been murdered!"
Elspeth looked over her shoulder, her brows wrinkled, her eyes filled with doubt.
"You jest, surely."
"No, come see."
Her grandmother pulled at her elbow, urging her to leave the porridge and follow. On the short way to the murder scene, Elspeth wondered if the prior night's events she had witnessed had anything to do with this. As they turned the corner, she saw Lord de War just ahead of them, approaching the crowd, his jaws set, his back stiff. He stopped in front of the buttery, its empty ale casks lining the walls while waiting to be hauled away. "Stand back," he ordered. His servants made a path and waited silently for his assessment. Making her way behind him, Elspeth peered around his shoulder to stare at the stranger dead before her. She shivered at the sight of so much blood and at the corpse's painful, open-mouthed expression. Turning to practical matters, she frowned, knowing that in all likelihood she'd be the one assigned to clean the room. When she stepped back to give de War more space, she caught sight of her grandmother looking through the door, her face drained of all color. Fearing the gruesome sight too much for her elder, Elspeth led her away to a bench at a trestle.
"Come, sit. You don't look well."
The old woman nodded meekly and did as she was bidden.
"It's a horrible sight,"
Elspeth murmured and patted her hand. Still her grandmother did not speak. Studying her countenance closer, Elspeth saw fear in her eyes. Elspeth's mind rushed to the memory of her grandmother roaming the halls at night, refusing to relay her reasons.
"Do you know something of this matter?"
Silence filled the short distance between them, but behind the woman's fearful expression, guilt arose.
"Gran,
Elspeth shook her arm once.
what is it?"
I know that man."
Her trembling hand went to her forehead. Her eyes squeezed shut as she took a ragged breath.
"Know him? How?"
Gran shook her head.
"I can now say more."
"Can it or will not?"
With a stubborn set of her jaw, she answered.
"Will not."
Elspeth gritted her teeth in frustration before asking.
"Do you know who murdered him? Or why?"
"Nay, child, I don't know."
Seeing the doubt in Elspeth's eyes, she added,
"I swear, girl, I do not."
"All right, then."
Elspeth reached for her hands, helped her stand, and led her back toward the crowd.
"Where are we going?"
"To tell Lord de War what you know."
Elspeth kept a firm grip on her arm and resolutely steered her across the room. They stood and waited while Lord de War questioned the dairyman. "When did you discover this?" "Sire, this morning, as I returned from the barn." "Did you see anyone upon your return?" "No, my lord." "Or when you left for the barn?" "No." "Did you notice these footprints when you left?" "No, the room was too dark. But they was made after I went out. Otherwise I would have walked across them, leaving my own tracks." De War's right eyebrow rose at that logic. "Send for Lord Hampton," he ordered over his shoulder. Everything had become unsettled upon Hampton's arrival, and De War felt that, somehow, one connected itself firmly to the other. "Have any of you seen this man before?" De War studied the group before him. All shook their heads. "Did any of you remove anything from the room or the body?" Again a sea of heads told him no. Standing behind the crowd, Angus looked across the great hall toward Yeston. His eyes narrowed and his head tilted in his unspoken question. Yeston arched one brow, laced his fingers together, palms out, and cracked his knuckles. The cold, malevolent expression in his pale eyes chilled Angus to the marrow, making him swallow hard and take a step closer to his father. De War's leech stepped out of the room, wiping his hands clean. "Sire, he's been dead for several hours. A knife is the murder weapon by the looks of the wound." "And no knife was found," De War stated rather than questioned the crowd. Sighing, he turned upon Richard's arrival. "Ah, you're here." "What news, your lordship?" Richard asked. "Murder and mystery." Pointing toward the door, Brennan asked, "Do you know this man?" Richard stepped in, studying the corpse. "I do not," he finally answered when he returned to the hall. As I suspected, no one does. He ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of defeat.
By your leave, sire.
Elspeth's timid voice broke the silence. Yes? Dwar's concerned eyes focused on her.
My grandmother says she knows something of this matter.
Really? Dwar's piercing gaze fixed itself on the trembling crone. Speak, what do you know?
Sire, I really don't know much, truly, but I think I may have seen him.
Think you've seen him? When?
Last night.
Do you know his name?
No, sire.
Well, then how did you come to see him?
Like I said, it may have been him. It was too dark to tell clearly, and he wore his hood up. But he knocked on the door late last night, and I let him in.
Do you always admit strangers into my home in the dead of night? His angry countenance frightened her even more.
Sire, he said he had urgent business, though I know not with whom, and the weather was so cold. I wouldn't have turned man or beast away on a night like that.
He shrugged at that explanation. It couldn't be helped now. Where did he go when you let him in?
He walked down the hall toward the stairs. From there, I dinna see, sire.
Elspeth frowned, wondering if her grandmother lied. But seeing her frightened face, she remained quiet, willing to leave her questions for later.